Okay, I want to take you back 23 years to a great party that I went to at Andy's house. No, I want to go back 1 year after that. 23 years ago, when I was 18. Now, 18-year-olds back when I was 18 are not like the 18-year-olds you see today on their scooters with their beards and their tattoos and their steroids, okay? Was not that kind of 18-year-old. I've been a Christian for just a matter of months, and I had my first proper job working in a water testing laboratory for Anglian Water. And so there I was in this lab trying to work out, how do I live out this Christianity thing here in this lab? How do I do 8 hours of God-honoring work 5 days a week when I didn't even fully understand what the purpose of the job was? How am I supposed to respond to these conversations where the second somebody walks out the door, everybody just gets their claws out? How do I respond? What am I supposed to do about this really tall Scottish guy? Have we got any tall Scottish guys in the room? Good. Hopefully not this one, but there was this really tall Scottish guy who absolutely hated me for apparently no reason. He was treating me like I had poisoned his favorite child. I just didn't know how to respond to that. We had a clock-in system. There was a flexi time, and I was like, what is acceptable to do? Like, do I have to kind of clock out and then go to the loo, or can I kind of do that like on the clock? And then questions about, how do I share my faith? How do I share my faith with this lovely Jewish lady that I would sometimes sit with at lunchtime? How do I share my faith with her? How do I share my faith with Marcus, the atheist in the room next door? This was back when atheism was cool, by the way. And then on Sunday, I would be in church, and I was being taught what the Bible said. And everyone at church was incredibly lovely towards me. At church, I was given opportunities to develop as a leader and as a speaker. Some of you are thinking, not that well developed. And everyone was interested and absolutely loved at church Joe. But nobody seemed to be aware of at work Joe. Nobody seemed to be aware of at football Joe or at the pub Joe. And no one was really interested in the challenges that I was facing in those places. And no one really seemed to have anything to say to encourage or to equip me for the opportunities that I also had in those places to live as a disciple and to grow in those places and to show my faith and to share my faith with all these different people that I was connecting with. When I became studying at London School of Theology Joe, that Joe everyone was really interested in him. Everyone was really interested in me when I became overseas homeless ministry Joe. But then when I came back from South Africa and I got a job in recruitment, a secular job, nobody was particularly interested in that at work Joe. That was 23 years ago. I wonder if there are still 18-year-old Joes, new to faith, finding the same disconnect between the life that they're living for most of their life and those, couple of hours on a Sunday, couple of hours on a Wednesday night. Are they finding that same disconnect that is still in operation? If you're here today and you're involved in church life in any way, which I'm assuming you are, it's called Ekklesia, but if you've just walked in here anyway, welcome. But if you're involved in church life in any way, and particularly if you have some kind of leadership responsibility, I want to share with you 3 Ps that I think are going to help you with 2 challenges that you have right now. And I say challenges, they're kind of opportunities. I think it's maybe better to frame it that way. The first is, I think that these 3 Ps could help you with the long-term opportunity that you have to help disciple the at-work Joes, the at-university Rotendos, the at chess club Derricks, the at home providing free childcare for their adult children Anitas. These 3 Ps will help you to help these people faithfully follow Jesus in every single aspect of their life that God has invited them to live. They're based on years of research, they're based on lots of experimenting and practice, and they're also, most importantly, based just on the wisdom of church leaders and just normal, regular Christians who are finding what does and what doesn't work in helping them to follow Jesus wherever they happen to be. And my money back guarantee to you is if you put these 3 Ps into practice and they don't put you in the top 10 disciplers in the country, please speak to Andy and he will be happy to give you another one of my booklets for free. So that's one of the things these Ps will help you with. The other thing that I think they might help you with is the opportunity that you have while you're here at Ekklesia. We've got this fantastic group of people, have some amazing speakers coming up today and tomorrow. But we all know what it's like when we come to these things. There's so much content, there's so much information. And so what I'm hoping is that, that these 3 Ps are gonna act kind of as containers that will help you to put everything else into as we go along. Just to say, is there someone clicking the slides? Because I'm not. Yeah, fantastic. They're waving at me. I don't know if they're like saying, yes, we are clicking or yes, we're going to. Yeah, keep going, keep going. This is where I do my Chris Whitty bit. Yeah, fantastic. We're up to speed. Cheers, mate. Okay, so let's start off with our first P. And our first P is purpose. God has purpose for his people in this world. And what I'm about to put up on the screen is not an exhaustive list, so please don't complain, but these are just kind of some general headings that I think we can get behind. God's people in this world are called to look after the world and to make the most of God's creation. We're called to be people who love God and who love others. We're called to be people who believe in and who live according to the gospel. We're called to become more like Jesus. We're called to represent God and his kingdom to the world. And we are called to make disciples. Now, you're all looking at that list like, how have you not added this thing in? And I know what some of those things might be. But let's at least agree on the ones that are there. And I think we would all agree that they're all amazing things. They maybe sound like quite big and lofty things, but they're really beautiful things, really important things that we are called to do as God's people. Generally speaking, if we do see a way of these things being lived out in the world, I think on the whole, we probably think about the stuff that we do together, the stuff that we do when we gather as church, the stuff that we might do through our Christian organizations, the stuff that we might do through our small groups or missional communities, if you can still remember those, the stuff that we might do through our ministry teams. Now that's really excellent and that's biblical and that's good. And of course, we want to live out those things in the stuff that we do when we're together. But what I think we sometimes find harder to visualize is how God can work out these purposes through his people when we're not together, when people are at work, when they're at college, when they're with their mates, when they're caring for their elderly relatives. Our theology training and our existing church culture just generally doesn't give us the imagination we need to see how these things up on the screen can be lived out in the individual life of each believer, whatever their context happens to be. One of the most important things you can do, if you're involved in a church in whatever capacity it might be, if you're working in a Christian organization, one of the most important things you can do is to help an individual see the purpose that God has for them in what they do in their everyday life. Back when I was at LICC, that's the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, for long, we did a couple of pieces of research, and we asked people, to what extent do you have a clear sense of God's purpose for you in your everyday life? And what we found is whenever people had a clear sense of God's purpose for wherever they are in their everyday life, every other marker of discipleship increased, whether that's looking at the upward dimensions of discipleship, the inwards and the outwards. Every single marker went up, and it was all tied to this important word of purpose. Purpose is like the banks of a river. It turns what would just be a big puddle of faith into a life of direction and of usefulness and of definition. When people can see how the sector that they serve in, whether that's education, construction, sport, parenting, social spheres, when they understand the importance of these big areas of life that they're connected to, and when they can start to see how they can play their individual role within that sector, within that space, and they can see how that matters to God, it makes such an incredibly huge difference to how they see themselves and to how they live. And so a question for you: do you see people's everyday lives as places where they can grow and where they can live out their discipleship? Have you got the imagination for what that might look like for the people you are seeking to serve? And if you do, and I know that many of you will have that, how much is that being implemented in what you do? How much is that shaping? How much is that reflected in the stories that get told in and through your church or your organization? Is it reflected in what gets prayed for and in what you connect the Bible to? Is it reflected in the conversations that you have with people over coffee or over WhatsApp? So that's our first P, is purpose. Our second P is practices. Because having purpose is really, really important, but knowing who you are called to be and then actually being that person that you now want to be are two different things. In the language of Dallas Willard, we don't just need to try, we need to train. And one of the main ways that disciples grow is through engaging wisely and engaging regularly with spiritual practices. I once had the privilege of interviewing a debt collector. And this debt collectors not always the most popular people in the Bible. And I think, throughout the centuries, their graph hasn't really moved in the direction they were hoping. But this debt collector who I interviewed once, just a few weeks before I interviewed him, he had been sent a card from one of his customers thanking him for how helpful and for how supportive he had been. That man spends every working day, at the start of every working day, he spends time reading the Bible and praying over the Bible and connecting it to the day that he's about to have in whatever McDonald's happens to be the closest McDonald's to where his first visit of the day is going to be. A little while after that, I had another great conversation with a lady who works in the armed forces. And this lady, she wanted to know more of God's strength for her and to be more like Jesus as she went about her work. And so what she did is every day when she had to clean her firearm, we all know what that's like, got to do it again. But every day when she had to clean her firearm, she used that as a cue, as a prompt to stop and to reconnect with God and to think, okay, how well am I doing so far today at loving people, at being fair with people, at being gracious to people? And she had a little section of a psalm that she had memorized that she would just kind of bring to mind. And she would use that time to reconnect with God and to pray for her work and for the people that she was serving. In some research that I was involved in, again, back when I was at LICC, We took a bunch of Christians, around 80 Christians. They worked we gave them 4 different practices to experiment with. And each of these practices had a clear connection to everyday life. And what we did is we surveyed and we interviewed them at different stages of the research. And after just 12 weeks of engaging with these 4 practices, not everybody engaged with every practice, but after just 3 months of us measuring them, their attitudes, how they treated people, their confidence, how much they were talking about their faith, how comfortable they felt talking about their faith, all of these markers were going up. People grow so much when we help them to engage wisely and regularly with the right spiritual practices. Just a couple of practical things that you might want to particularly think about in this area. One is, often people find it hard to find a spot in their day. Lots of people have great intentions around engaging with practices, but they don't have a plan for how to do it. And that's often one of the main ways we can help them, is just identifying a spot in their day or in their week where they might engage with a particular practice. Also, lots of people find that practices can easily be disconnected from their life. They kind of have their quiet time, they say their prayers, and then, kind of close the book, get up off your knees, and everything kind of stays the same. So often people need help connecting these practices to their lives. And again, that's something I would love to have conversations with you about. And also, I often find people have a lot of guilt when it comes to spiritual practices. If you're in a pastoral position, just be aware that often underneath the surface for a lot of people, there is a lot of guilt when it comes to engagement or their lack of engagement with practices. Okay, so we need purpose to know what we're aiming for. We need practices that are going to help us to grow into the people God is calling us to be. And then third, and as a relief for you, that kind of finally from the preacher, our third and final P is people. In every single piece of research that I have been involved in, and in every good piece of research that I have read from others about discipleship, the importance of relational inputs comes up time and time again. A little while ago, I had the privilege of doing some research for Fusion. Any Fusion people in the house? Boo. Okay. Because normally you'd say yay, that's why I was doing that. I'm not booing Fusion, just to be clear. But I did some research for Fusion, looking at the missional lives of undergrad students in the UK. And then just before that, I did some research for LICC, looking at the faith and lives of 18 to 35-year-old Christians in the UK. And in these conversations, I'd always start off wanting to know, what is it that you're already doing well? How are you already following Jesus in your work, at uni, in your jiu-jitsu class, whatever it is they've been talking about? How do you follow Jesus there? How are you pointing others towards Jesus? What do you think you're doing well? We'd have a really great conversation around that. And then after that part of the conversation, I would say, what is it? I've heard you say all these amazing things about how you're following Jesus, but what is it that is helping you to do that? What's helped you to become that kind of person? What is sustaining you to keep living this life week in, week out? And for almost every single one of them, the main part, or at least a significant part of their answer, would be a person or some people who are helping them and supporting them in their discipleship. It's my brother-in-law. It's my parents. It's my friend. It's my small group. It's my student worker. I'll say this one quietly. Sometimes they would even say, it was my pastor. Just a couple of notes on this one, and then you're going to have some time to chat through some of this stuff and what this looks like in your context. But just a couple of dimensions of these relationships that come through in the conversations and in the research and in what I observe. One is the importance of peer-to-peer support. So having those people who will be alongside you, praying for you, encouraging you, sharing wisdom with you, just providing you with accountability. But that's something that people often say is important. And sometimes there's just this kind of sense of, I know that I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one going to school. I'm not the only one going to uni. I'm not the only one going to work. I'm not the only one trying to care for my kids or whatever it might be and follow Jesus. They know there's others who are doing this with me. There's others who are trying to engage in these practices. There are others trying to make this difference. So there's something really important about that kind of peer-to-peer, side-to-side element. But then there's also something really powerful about role modeling. And we all know this. When you are around somebody who is like Jesus, it's so contagious. And we just learn, we see them do things, and there's things that we pick up from them. There's things that we feel, and then we think, oh, I want to be more like that. So there's something really important about role modeling. And also just when we hear people talking about what they're doing in their context and how they're navigating the challenges that God has given them. So those are our 3 Ps: purpose, practices, and people. There is way more detail. I know that you will wish I could say so much more than I've been able to say now, but it wasn't a joke. But there is plenty more in the report. So please do, have some time to read that, maybe during while the other speakers are up. But I promise you, if you focus on those, I really do think they will help you as you seek to disciple others. Thank you.